from some of what that purpose is that we have. Okay? Let's go to page number 34 now. And this is what have been our results, or what are our results, okay? So we're going to revisit Drucker, and this is question number 4. And he gives us a little bit of context for defining results and documenting results and identifying the extent in which the agency has achieved results. So we get some of that background there. Again, for the profit sector of the world, like their bottom line is whether or not you've actually been able to achieve some results, okay? So that bottom line is really that governing force that determines whether or not you've been successful. That's not, and it doesn't matter, it's like if you're breaking even and having a profit margin, then you're successful. With social services, it's a little bit different, okay? So we have to look at short-term accomplishments and long-term change, and that's really where our evaluation comes from. So some key points from Drucker when he talks about this question number 4 of what are our results is that we have to identify, document, and then use our results as part of the overall management for our agency. So we have to be able to draw off of that. So it's consistent with really good quality management. Again, if you look at the theory of change, we see that performance management is highlighted as a critical piece because that is that agency accountability. And so performance management and making sure that we're using those sound management principles of gathering the data and then using it and applying it in a way that works. So just like we've already identified, you know, the 2 different kinds of assessment data, you know, the quantitative and the qualitative, we can also identify results. So we did that when we were talking about needs and we were talking about assessments, was qualitative and quantitative. And now we're going to talk about some results that are both quantitative and qualitative, okay? Remember, our qualitative stuff is kind of the soft stuff. It's limited in numbers. It's customer survey type activities. Our quantitative in this scenario is going to be the number of people who are actually accomplishing the things that we've identified wanting to accomplish. Cool?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So each agency has to be able to identify what our outcomes are going to be and how we measure success. So data has to be, you know, used within that process, and we have to be able to say, have we been successful? Okay? So with this, let's move on to page number 35. Lainey, this is going to touch down a little bit on what you had talked about, and this is when we discover that we haven't produced those results, okay? We've ran our program, we've tried to get our results, we're not hitting the mark, it's not working. We're going to look to see, do we need to strengthen or abandon some of the programs? Abandonment happens, it needs to be something that's intentional. We've done that at Community Action Partnership. We had personal touch home care. It was a really critical piece of the solution as it came to providing services for people who were in their homes and needed supports. And at the time when it was developed, it was the only one in our area. So we had to be that person that provided the services. As we reevaluated that process, a number of other agencies existed who could also do that. So it was no longer in our best interest as an agency or a need within our community to continue with a program where other needs were already, you know, other places were already covering those needs. So we need to make sure that need alone doesn't justify continuing things, nor does tradition. We can't just do it because that's the way we've always done it. So we have to make sure that we look at distinguishing programs that aren't productive with, you know, and programs that just shouldn't be there anymore. Programs that aren't productive, we just need to figure out a way to make them productive. We need to look at the data, we need to look at the downfalls, we need to strengthen things. Things that don't need to be there, we probably need to figure out an exit strategy. If it's not a need that needs to be there, we don't need to put our energy into it necessarily if that need is met elsewhere. So we've talked just briefly about those points that are there. What we want to see at the bottom of this page here on 35 is a couple of, you know, examples. If somebody could read, however, starting with the paragraph that says however on page 35.
However, the agency must be careful to distinguish between programs and services that are not productive and that should no longer be a part of the agency's range of services. And those services that are essential but are currently not producing outstanding results.
Okay, awesome. And that just reiterates what our need is here, is we're either going to strengthen or we're going to move away from some of the programs that are being provided. Okay?
So does that also include a fiscal analyzation of it costs X amount to make it productive, we don't have the money?
Yeah, exactly. So Drucker is our guy who talks to us about management principles, and we're going to get in later on to Reginald Carter, and he talks to us about accountability pieces, and that's really where we weave in a fair amount of the fiscal pieces is, is this fiscally prudent for us to continue on in this way? So let's move on to page number 36. Paragraph number 1 says that we use the words results and the word outcomes interchangeably as we move through various principles. Simply put, outcomes or results are changes observed or recorded after participation in a service or an activity. For the family, outcomes are changes in knowledge, attitude, skill, ability, or behavior. For the agency and community outcomes, they might be things such as changes in agency or public policy, organizational effectiveness, social or health conditions. So we see here that there are the changes that happen as a result of the services that we provide. We're going to use these terms interchangeably. So let's talk a little bit about the types of outcomes. Outcomes are things that are going to happen over time. I always have this visualization of the sign language term for progress. So the sign for it is, you just move up. So for me, that's a helpful idea of time passing. You start off at your baseline and you move up. And each of these stops in that progress point is going to be a different benchmark or a place. So we see change over time, okay? And so change over time, we see change in status or change in direction. So change over time is just something short-term, intermediate, long-term. Do you have a question?
I was going to say I would head to that change in attitude.
Change in attitude, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Change in status is, sometimes people might feel safe at one point and in crisis, so that would be a change in status, is to help somebody go from in crisis to feeling safe. And change in direction, a positive, a neutral, which is like no change, or a negative change. So those are all different examples of what those types of outcomes look like. As we move forward, we see that in addition, we have different levels of outcome. Again, family, agency, community, and they all involve some type of that incremental change, okay? But there's different types of those changes like we explained. So on page 37, if we can turn there, if I could have somebody read that first portion of self-sufficiency.
Self-sufficiency is more than employment and employment-related activities. It can also include outcomes from support activities necessary for the movement towards self-sufficiency and the reduction and elimination of barriers preventing self-sufficiency.
Okay, so here we see some outcome statements that have been articulated for the family level goals, and those are the bulleted points. So like persons increased earned income, or unemployed persons obtained employment or self-employment. So these are just articulated outcomes for a need that's been identified on that family level. So that all relates back to that historic goal of the number 1. And then if we look at goal number 6 of those historic goals, we see that there's a broad range of outcomes that are achieved by persons or families who maintain a level of stability or well-being as a result of community action. So again, goal number 6 is articulated there, and we see exactly what that goal is, and then this is appropriate outcome language for something that you might be able to accomplish. Persons obtained access to services. Senior citizens and individuals with disabilities maintain independent living. So we have these examples of how you're going to have that outcome language that is reflected from, we have our national goal, we've identified a need, and now we've identified our desired outcome or what we hope to accomplish. Okay? So on page 37, just again with our improved understanding of how individuals and families move towards achievement of outcomes, we're able to weave in some of these elements within our theory of change. So look over here again with the theory of change, individuals and families with low incomes are stable and achieve economic security. We've integrated those 6 national goals to reflect in those 3 ones there. Locally, we're going to have some goals that we capture within our outcomes as well. So we define a little bit of that. Another thing that happened with our theory of change is that we moved away from the language of self-sufficiency and we talk more about economic security, which that language shift, again, we're just on the eve of the 2nd birthday of the theory of change, so it hasn't quite stuck yet, but we're working on it because that's a really critical piece, economic stability versus self-sufficiency, which is a really important goal to have there. So we will look right now onto page number 38. Okay. So on page number 38, I just have to point out there's no agency level goal with the theory of change. It's woven into everything. Agency capacity is something that we are going to look at within that performance management piece of the theory of change, and as well as just the foundational statement. So it's not really eliminated from the theory of change, our agency responsibility and evaluation of capacity. So we see that actually that we're talking a lot about our agency and our agency outcomes. When we do our annual report, we're going to report out that everybody in this room got training. We're going to report out when our board receives training. Those are all really critical pieces for us as we report to the state level and then up to the feds about what our agency is doing to meet these goals. So,
speaking of, I have one quick question.
yes.
So Roma, was it specifically identified for community action? And do you know if it's used anywhere else? I mean, as a theory model and other training?
So my understanding is that Boy Scouts, the structure of Boy Scouts is supposed to use it, as well as the United Way. So, and I can research that more, but that's
I was just curious.
what I heard.
It seems very like
Scouts now.
Scouts. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, just Scouts. Yeah, Scouts.
Scouts,
Yeah,
right.
Scouts have done that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
exactly. Exactly.
As a
Okay.
theory of change in general, I have a master's in change. This is, I mean, the theory is pretty overarching and it even works in profit organizations.
Right.
Right. So,
the accountability
yeah.
cycle that's up there is just, it seems so basic that why wouldn't you, I mean.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so apparent, why wouldn't you use it in other situations
it
and
is.
circumstances,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yes.
So, okay.
But
That was
what
all.
you'd be surprised is how much it's not used.
Not used, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Or
And
it's
that's-
trained and never used.
Yeah, exactly, and
Yes.
that's what I like, is that we really are working as a network as well as an agency to make sure that we implement the
Right.
phases of this in what we do, which is
Well,
why
and
it's
even
cool
in-
now to,
Even interdepartment, I can see, like,
Yeah.
I was talking about some of the stuff we're already doing with the IT department, I'm looking
Yeah.
at it and I'm going, well, yeah, I evaluated it, we assessed
Yeah.
it, now we've got the planning, I'm in the
Right.
middle
Yeah.
of implementation.
exactly.
Right.
This is a perfect account,
You
it's
have
a
to
perfect cycle
partner.
to
Yeah.
get through it.
You're
properly.
building something that you're gonna be able to present because it's based off of a really sequential and,
And a
yeah.
successful model, okay.
Exactly.
That
So,
was my question.
Pages
Shared
38
values
and
is one of the
39
most
are going to give us some examples here. 38, we're going to talk about examples of agency outcomes. The big thing here is that it's not the existence or counting of the partnerships that we look at. It's really talking about what happens as a result of those partnerships. So we talk about collaborating. That's something that's been there since 1964, is we're going to leverage those different resources that are within the community. But what we want to do is make sure that those are effective partnerships and effective collaboration. Making a referral means nothing, but making a referral that led to an individual receiving a gas voucher is awesome, because that is something that has a noticeable change or a noticeable outcome for the people that we're serving. So we're looking there at just not counting that number, but really looking at what the results what happens as a result of it. So, again, the historic goal number 5 that's up here, agencies increase their capacity to achieve results. This is something that we see with the new theory of change and how we're going to report out on various things. Okay? So page number 38, you can read through those examples if it's something that you feel like might be real helpful for you. For the purpose of time, I'm gonna give you kind of the key principles that are within that so that we can continue to plug forward.
And you know
Let's
that
look
clock's
at-
off too, right?
That clock's, oh, is it?
Yes.
What
It's only
time is it?
10:50 right now.
10:50.
So you're
Oh.
right on schedule, you were on
I
schedule.
am on
previously.
schedule, we are not behind, this is awesome. Oh,
I wanna
goodness,
see her
okay.
talk fast.
I know,
No,
it's
no,
not
yeah.
good, but I knew she was in panic
Yeah,
mode looking at the clock.
do you not want me to skim? Cause, yeah, so let's look at, page number 39 right now, which is just examples of community outcomes, okay? And so these are the conditions in which people live. This is, again, that historic goal number 2. I'm gonna move this so that people can see. I keep on referencing posters that are hidden or blocked, but we do have these peppered throughout your manual, so you can refer there as well. So, so again, page 39 here, goals 2 and 3 have really, they've stayed, and those are things that you're gonna see in the theory of change. These historic goals have been integrated into this new theory of change. Then there is that renewed focus on the importance of community level outcomes. So really, again, not just counting the number of referrals, counting what has happened as a result of the referrals that we have. So if somebody could, on the goal number 2, just read that shaded part at the top there.
I will. Community outcomes are an integral part of community action and describe the allocation and focusing of public and private resources for anti-poverty purposes, improvement of the community infrastructure, and creation of employment and other resources to support low-income people in their transition towards self-sufficiency.
Cool. So what happens with this is it's important for us to think about the way that we're gonna have our outcome language, okay? Because we're looking at this community level outcome, we wanna make sure that the language is reflected appropriately. So like with weatherization, we wouldn't say, you know, X amount of houses were weatherized. What we would say is, we'd say community housing stock was improved, you know, and so that would be your outcome. We're not gonna talk necessarily about our strategy, we're just gonna say on that community level, our housing stock was improved. And we know that that happened as a result of the service and strategy that was employed with the weatherization department. So again, we have to make sure that our language is matching as we're going through. We've identified needs, we wanna make sure that our outcomes reflect that same level of services. So these are just examples of those community level needs that are there. Does that make sense? Okay, so goal number 3 here is that low-income people own a stake in their community, which I don't like because it's not people first language, which is another thing that's happening within our network is people who are low income or less economically stable. So anyhow, community outcomes describe the participation of low-income people in community organizations and community activities, including volunteering or paid involvement. It includes business and home ownership, indicators of positive community change. So examples of that could be that the number of low-income persons owning a business was increased. It could be that the number of low-income representatives on our board has increased. So those are different examples there. Again, just matching that outcome with that need, okay? So on page number 40, we're gonna talk for just a minute here about how we've identified needs, and we've identified, so we also identify some results in one domain or all levels. So previously, the needs were assessed on all 3 levels, and now we have to consider those outcomes or those results again on all 3 levels. So many social sector organizations help people find employment. Community actions also create jobs. We reduce barriers, we leverage funding for training, and contribute to the overall economy and economic development within the community. Okay, so that's kind of the example we're gonna build off of right now to talk about outcomes as it relates to employment. So a family level would say these employment outcomes would be that individuals secured employment, individuals had improved earnings. An agency level would be, you know, in partnership with partnership established with public agency for job training, or the agency came to an agreement made with a private corporation for placement. So again, results that reflect the language at the level that we've identified: community, agency, family was that 3rd one. Okay? So let's go then, and the other thing that we have to remember with community level stuff is